Terrorists always have some kind of political or religious agenda. Obviously, by definition, an extreme agenda if they're willing to kill in order to propagate it. Terrorists are very weak by definition. They cannot hope to militarily defeat the enemy that they are fighting. The most they can hope to do is to score a propaganda coup and thereby to break the will of the enemy. So it's a way to send a message by essentially creating a body count. Terrorism is almost impossible to imagine without the mass media. ISIS, for example, is able to use the internet to put up videos of hideous atrocities. Well, the earliest terrorist weapons were actually, believe it or not, knives. That was the favored weapon of the Sicarii. In fact, Sicarii means daggermen. Those were the Jewish terrorists in first century Judea who terrorized Romans and their sympathizers. Terrorism became much more of an industrial phenomenon in the 19th century with the invention of dynamite. That was the preferred weapon of the anarchists who would set off bombs in crowded cafes in cities like Paris or Barcelona. Then you move forward to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, where I would say the characteristic weapon of the terrorist is the AK-47 that even became part of the flag of Hezbollah. More recently, in the last several decades, I would say the dominant terrorist weapon has been, unfortunately, the car bomb, often driven by a suicide bomber into a crowd of people. Jihadists have become the dominant terrorists since 1979. In the 1980s, you saw the formation of groups such as al-Qaeda. You really saw the Middle East becoming the epicenter of terrorism, and driven primarily by Palestinian groups, especially the PLO, which suddenly saw terrorism as their ticket to statehood and the way to get the world to pay attention to their grievances. I think the principal terrorist threats confronting the U.S. and the world today are all Islamist, and they are groups that are based in this arc of instability stretching from West Africa to Central Asia and including pretty much all of North Africa and the greater Middle East, from Boko Haram in Nigeria to al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen to ISIS and the Al-Nusra front in Syria to Pakistan and Afghanistan, groups like the Taliban and the Haqqani network. The internet allows terrorists not only to publicize their atrocities, but also to recruit, to organize, to train. So it's a much more capable medium for terrorist organizations than television ever was. I think fundamentally to dry up the sources of jihadist terrorism requires a more modern ideology that puts the emphasis on economic growth and personal liberty rather than the kind of hopelessness and despair of poverty and repression which breeds extremism, which leads many young men to take up arms or to strap on suicide vests. The answer to the problem of Islamist terrorism is a transformation in the Muslim world, but that's going to be a decades-long, maybe a centuries-long project, and we're only going to be able to influence that at the margins.